Hello, everybody.
Hello.
It is 10 o'clock on Saturday night. I am Chris Weave. This is Starfleet Tactical. I have my girl Friday, Lissa, my producer. Thank you, Lissa, for
Hello.
so. Lissa, just out of curiosity, I mean, it's been a while since we've sort of started it this way, etc. Do I look today? I haven't asked you this in a while. Do I look today like I'm speaking for my employer?
Not at all.
That's good because I am not speaking for my employer. Um, so what have you been up to?
Today we went to Micro Center, and so in the next couple of weeks we're gonna finish building a desktop PC for me because guys, I've been streaming off of a laptop the past 2 years. And OBS has decided that it does not like that if I'm PC gaming now at this point, despite the fact, like it's a decent gaming laptop. So
Yeah, and the funny thing is that it, apparently it used to work, but all of a sudden it just decided to get cranky on you.
look, OBS is OBS. Like updates are gonna update.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can do that. I can see that. So, um, Wilhelm said something about I thought you were Alec. Alec was, you may recall, those of you who watched the last show, the plan was Alec was going to be here, but
That
Alec.
hi.
I miss not having Buddy around to climb all over me. I'm trying to. So, Alec was going to be here last
For
week.
those who are uninitiated, this is Esri.
Esri's cute. I love Esri. Alec was supposed to be here, but he told me a couple of days ago that that if it was okay, he wasn't going to come today because he's got to get up at like 5 a.m. to get on an airplane. So that's perfectly fine. I said that I could continue doing what I'm going to do, which is going through the naval summary thing because I'm trying to get myself back up to speed on all the Navy stuff so that I can sort of march forward and do that. But today was kind of a busy day. As I was telling Lissa beforehand, I woke up at 12:15 this morning, decided that it wasn't time to get up, managed to get back to sleep about 1:30, woke up again about 6:30, and then about 10, rolled out to drive to Cincinnati, which is about an hour away from where I live, to go to a book signing that a friend of mine was doing. My friend Joelle Presby, you've heard me mention her husband Andy many times on the show, but Joelle is herself a science fiction writer, former Navy nuke, Annapolis graduate, surface warfare officer, et cetera. She's a pretty impressive person too. And also there were Lydia Scher and Patrick Childs. I hadn't met Lydia before. I had reason to think that she might be a character, and it turned out that she is. I had met Patrick before. I'm really looking forward to reading his new book that just came out like this last week, which is Frozen Orbit, and it's a sequel to an earlier book. Yeah, don't forget to hit the like button. So he's a good guy to talk to. And I don't know about Lydia, but Patrick and Joelle are both going to be at Marcon in Memorial Weekend, which is where I'm going to be doing some master of ceremonies duties and, fan guest sort of deal. And I'm also basically, you may recall, for those who are longtime viewers, I'm going to be running my own little green room, basically. So I basically rented the equivalent of a 2-bedroom apartment for the duration of the con. So everybody should come and join us in Columbus, Ohio, Memorial Weekend at MarCon. Not to be confused with MarsCon, which is a con in Minneapolis, and also not to be confused with MarsCon, which is a con in somewhere in Virginia. It's been moving around a lot, and I can't remember if it's currently in Richmond or currently in Williamsburg, or it's a con that's keeps moving around a little bit. So good evening to everybody. I see a lot of the usual suspects, including my brother Delon, who I wasn't sure if he was going to make it because I know that he has a niece. No, not niece, like grandniece. Delon, tell me the relationship. I can't remember. I'm too tired to figure out what it is when it's your aunt-in-law's granddaughter, if I remember correctly, was going up to visit the baby. So hello for
Grandniece once removed?
something like that. To be honest, it's one of those things that I could sit down with the chart and figure out exactly what it is, but I'm just, yeah, Delon says grandniece. Technically, I don't think I have any relation to this child, because I am not married into that family, as is my brother.
Hence the once removed.
Once removed is a generational thing.
Is it?
Yeah.
I thought it was a marriage thing.
No, it's a generational thing. So for instance, if you were my cousin, if I had a child, my child would be your first cousin once removed. So cousin is a word that basically
I just know that a second cousin.
No, second. So cousin is the term that determines who the relationship is, who the link is. So cousins share a grandfather, second cousins share a great grandfather. So my child, if we were cousins, my child would be your first cousin once removed. And if you had a child, the two children would be second cousins.
Fair enough.
So this is one of those things that I only know because of the glory that is Wikipedia. So, but in any event,
no.
Joelle's book came out not too long ago. I did a little bit of talking about it when it came out, but I'm going to go ahead and shill it again because it's a really good book. It's called The Dabari Snake Launcher. So Joelle, it's a book about, it's the prequel to the building of the world's first space elevator. So the plan is they're going to build this space elevator off Kilimanjaro in Eastern Africa. But in order to build the space elevator, they need, you can't just start on the ground to build the space elevator. You have to build it coming down, and they want to clear out some of the orbital debris that is in that path, etc. So they end up having to build an electromagnetic launcher in order to get stuff up into space so that they can do all that work to begin with. They don't want to build it on Kilimanjaro because that's where they're going to be building the elevator, and they want the two systems to be separate. So instead, they're going to build it in West Africa, up the site of this volcano. And Joelle actually grew up in West Africa. So she, her parents were missionaries. She was born in Paris, France, while her dad was in missionary school. And then they went to the Cameroon, and she spent 12 years in the Cameroon. And so this is a place that is very, very close to her heart. And when it came time to start her science fiction novel career, she decided that she was going to start it there. And she's somebody who planned out her career to be a science fiction author from the time that she was like 6. She decided she wanted to be a science fiction author. So it's a pretty good book. And then eventually, I think the next book is going to skip forward like 150 years, and they're going to be out in the outer solar system. I think that's the plan. I don't think she's planning on writing anything in between. So, but we'll see. And I've been sort of helping out a little bit with that, helping them think through a few things there. Andy and Joelle are both retired naval officers, former naval officers. So, I can help them with some stuff, but it's not like they need a whole lot of help from me. So, but, oh, well. Let's see. I'm trying to see if there's anything else going on here. Somebody's talking about a reactor. If your reactor control.
Yeah.
Before that, there was this one. If your reactor has a control rod once removed. They're playing on the
bubble, zoom.
Yeah, let's not go there.
No, you have bubble, boom, boom.
Yes.
There's a difference. Just a tiny one.
So, So let's see. I want to say there was something else I was going to ask you about, and I can't remember what it was. So,
I don't.
but all right. Well, so I tell you what, everybody, here's what the plan's going to be. As I said the last time, I'm going through and doing a summary of all the naval stuff that I talked about, the specific articles that I talked about that I already did in some depth, but I did it like 9 months ago now, close to 9 months ago, is when I started that stuff at least. And I want to get back into doing that series, but I needed to re-listen to it all. I needed to sort of put it all back in perspective, et cetera. And I've been doing some more thinking about it. So it just kind of made sense to sort of pull it all together into a presentation. And it turns out to be a very dense presentation. So I'm doing it over multiple issues. Alec had a really great idea last time, which is do a slide and then see if there are any questions on that slide. And then, so the plan is we'll do this for a couple of sessions. We'll get back up to speed. And then I'm going to start working on a few new presentations. I don't know when the next time Pat's going to be on the show because he couldn't make it this week. He's currently, I think, in the simulator right now. And I think he said that he's not available next week. I need to double check that. So I'm operating under the assumption that at some point, Pat and I will talk more about Babylon 5 and we'll talk about some other stuff. In the meantime, I'm trying to pull some stuff together. I've got plans for a discussion about fighters in space combat, what it means to talk about fighters. I've been doing a lot of thinking about that recently. And to be honest, it's a subject that I've never done a presentation on. I've done my aircraft carriers in space, but I never really did one on fighters in particular, in part because I always just had this feeling that it hadn't gelled yet, that I hadn't had sort of the conceptual breakthrough on how to think about it. I now think I've kind of had that breakthrough and I know how I'm going to approach the problem. And so but I'm still at the point of wrapping my arms around it. Plus, there's a long list of books, et cetera, that I want to go through that I think I can, run through the science fiction converter and talk about their implications for science fiction. So most of you have probably heard me say this multiple times, but my thinking on these sorts of things is anything that, I don't want to cause anybody to not like something that they currently like, but I also want to create a situation where everybody's an educated consumer
you can always. So here's the thing. Nothing is above criticism. You might still enjoy it, but if you actually enjoy a series, you can sit down and critically think about it.
Yeah. And I want to make sure that people understand, what I sort of start with the assumption that everybody that listens to this might end up creating their own science fiction someday. And,
I play tabletop, so technically I'm always creating science fiction on a regular basis.
You might be creating your own background for a tabletop role-playing game. You might be creating it for a board game. You might be creating it for, a fan movie set in the Star Trek universe. All those sorts of things. And so my thinking on all of this is that if people are sort of educated about how things work, this is all about right. It should make us answer questions and we can answer. And it should, I also want to create a situation where when people look at stuff, they sort of understand how it works. And because I think, the science fiction that really, really makes me excited is not the ones where you take like World War II in space and file off the serial numbers and add in space at the end and just sort of dump it out there, right? The ones that make me real excited are the ones where it's like, oh wow, I never thought of that. Yeah, that's how that would work.
Yep. Also, in regards to, since you brought up Babylon 5 earlier, it's on Tubi, guys, at least for now. So if you want to rewatch it, there you go.
I've never heard of that. I've never heard of Tubi. Okay.
Yeah, it's another streaming service.
Okay.
And you can watch everything for free with ads. So
this is me writing down Tubi
TV.
TV.com, Babylon 5, because I was just, I bought the series. I bought the series and in DVD. And at one point I was copying it from DVD over to VHS because that's what the place where I would go to get on the treadmill, they had a VHS thing. They didn't have a DVD. That was a while ago. And so I had the original set of DVDs I had, and I've since replaced them with new DVDs that are at least somewhat remastered. And then when I watch them on my phone, or my laptop or something like that. And so I then go ahead and buy them again on YouTube or whatever. So I hope Warner Brothers appreciates the fact that I've paid for those things like 4 times.
Yeah, no, I know my dad's paid for them at least twice.
Yeah.
Because like we had the original DVDs, and Dad watched them so much that the like foil and everything just wore down from the laser, like reading it so many times.
Yeah, he watched it so much that the electrons dimmed.
Pretty much.
That the photons got dim. Yeah. Okay. I totally get that, and so yeah.
For the longest time, it was my dad's. I'm going to sit at my computer and watch something while I eat lunch.
Yeah, I totally get that. It was my when I got on the treadmill. This is back when I worked at CNA, and I found myself in situations where it was exactly the reason why I was doing it. I only watched it while I was on the treadmill, and I'd find myself going, wow, the next episode's really good. Do I have time to stay on the treadmill for an extra 45 minutes? Which is exactly the sort of thing that I was trying to get myself to do. So that worked out pretty well.
You would appreciate the text message my dad sent me the other day then.
Yes.
So this is in regards to Dylan. Let me go up. Dylan could never listen to AFI. I'm like, all right, I need context and an explanation, Dad. And of course, he's like, Babylon 5, Dylan. I'm like, Dad, I know who you're talking about. I need an explanation. He goes, because the girl is gray. I'm like, God damn it, Dad.
AFI?
A dad joke. A Fire Inside is a punk band from the early 2000s. They have a song that was popularized called Girls Gray.
Okay.
Girls Not Gray.
Okay. Yeah, Delon points out that DVDs, CDs, and Blu-rays only have a shelf life of about 5 to 10 years. I've actually found it to be longer than that.
It depends on how much you use them, honestly.
Well, it depends on how much you use them, and also depends upon how you store them. With all these things, like if you store them in a container that's at 130 degrees, they're gonna
definitely break down faster than if it's like in a climate controlled area.
Yeah. So, but yeah. Let's see. I'm seeing if there's anything else to say here. No, there doesn't appear to be. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and launch the presentation and go through another section of the presentation. And what I intend to do is stop after each slide. And so everybody, go ahead and put your questions in, and I'll try to address them. And my guess is we'll probably get through the Trent Hone section of this, and then we'll do the Lautenschlager the next time, and maybe the science fiction implications of that the time after that. I was looking at that section earlier today. I want to go back and put the hood up on the science fiction section of it a little bit more. So
when you do that, I'll pop out, and I'm going to be working on my stuff for my players tomorrow.
That sounds like a good plan. It's the thing is that if you don't have an emergency, you don't need a producer. But it's always good to have a producer because
I am the oh shit button.
Yeah. And so we're getting ready we're doing the next connections online, not next week, but the week after.
Nice.
And so that's one of the things where there's one where I may end up producing and it's unclear yet as to whether I'm going to produce and be the moderator for the panel, because we were sort of switching some stuff around. That's one of the things I have to do tomorrow, is figure it out. This is a day job. Actually, it's not a day job thing, because I'm not doing it for the day job. This is a Connections Online is a professional wargaming conference, because I'm a wargame designer and analyst in my day job. I am not doing it wearing my day job hat. So I am not speaking for my employer while doing this thing the week after next. But it's Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, the 18th through the 20th for the core hours. And there's an extended hours where we have some stuff that takes place after hours, before the conference starts and after the conference finishes, etc. The core hours are all set to be 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., which is the time zone that I call Washington State to Warsaw. Because you can get to those. Yeah, somebody said it's day job adjacent. It's day job adjacent. Those are that time frame you can get to. If you live from Washington State to Warsaw, you can visit the conference live without any real headache, right? You don't have to do anything heroic to like get up in the middle of the night, which you generally have to do. If you live in Australia, I'm sorry, I can't help you. You have to get up in the middle of the night, or you can watch it later, either by giving us the $5 that we charge for it, because it pays for StreamYard and some other things along like that. We don't really make any money on it. And then it just defrays some of the costs. And then about a month afterwards, we open it up to the entire world. And so if you go and do a search for Connections Online, you can find, we've done 2 previous episodes, 2 previous iterations of it, plus the showcase that we did last October. So 2 previous ones. I think it's 2 previous ones. They all blend together after a while.
I'm trying to remember the one that I produced for you.
I think
that was like April last year, right?
Yeah, it was last year. It was this time last year. Because the showcase, we've got another person involved. So we, my colleague Merle and I, we're the sort of fire brigade. So we only produce about a quarter of them, so that the other one's available in case we need to like monitor our Discord server or something like that. Because we do, you have to sort of keep track of those things. And occasionally we did have some problems. We did have some problems the first year where there was a tiff that broke out that was sort of annoying to have to deal with, but we had to sort of clamp things down in real time. Haven't had any issues since then. So, but this is one of those things that came out of COVID. I was being part of this. There's the Connections Online is a spinoff of Connections US, which has had spinoffs in the UK and Canada and other places. And we were trying to figure out how to do it online. And long story short, in the end, I just ended up spinning off and doing a separate conference. That I'm the guy who runs. And so I can't do it without my colleagues, Brant Guillory and Merle Robinson. Brant is from the Armchair Dragoons, and occasionally invites me on his podcast. Like I did one not too long ago. It should be going up sometime soon, talking about naval wargaming. And Merle is one of the people who does the national security decision-making game. So if you go to Gen Con or Dragon Con or Origins, they do this big seminar type game that's a lot of fun. So I'm going to answer the question from Wilhelm real quick. Let me throw it up. Which will perform better in space? Energy weapons like lasers or projectile weapons like missiles? It depends.
Yeah, it depends on like what the conditions are. Because if there's any kind of like space dust or anything like that, that can dissipate a laser. Yeah. But like if there's anything that's like large, that can get in the way of a projectile, like a missile. So it kind of depends on like what the conditions are that you're fighting in.
It's a lot on your technical assumptions also, because the thing with lasers is lasers have some beam spread.
Yeah.
And so the size of the aperture, the size of the mirror directly affects the size of the beam. The bigger the mirror, the tighter the spot that you can throw. And so that can be a big issue. And eventually, if you get far enough away, even if you've got the power, you've got some light speed lag issues. And so you're having to predict where, if I'm shooting.
I mean, that's really no different than like shooting, because you have to lead your target in real life. So
yeah, from that standpoint, that's correct. Although I can, if a ship is moving, I can, in the real world, like a naval ship, I can see it move. The photons are moving at the speed of light. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm 20,000 yards away, I've got effectively instantaneous updates. Now, my shells take a while to get there, but I, in effect, have instantaneous updates. If I'm shooting at something that's 30 light seconds away, I don't have instantaneous updates. And you want the spot as tight as possible to focus the damage. And so as a result of that, you've got issues with, where do I put the spot? So that's the long-winded way of saying that there's no real, I would argue that there is not a correct answer to that question. There is a correct analytical process that will get you to that answer, but it really sort of depends upon the particulars of your technology. And that's sort of a recurring theme that we see. Strategy, by and large, is technology independent. Mm-hmm. Strategy is about figuring out what your center of gravity is and what their center of gravity is, and being able to attack their center of gravity while protecting yours and things like that. So those strategic precepts are kind of, mm-hmm. I don't want to say immutable, but I would say they're fairly constant. Yeah. Tactics is inherently dependent on technology, right? Yeah. If you've got unguided weapons, your tactics look different than if you've got guided weapons. If your weapons are short range, your tactics look different than if they're long range. Yep. It's inherently dependent on tactics. In between, at the level of the operational level of war, as you might imagine, for a level of war that is designed to use tactical methods to gain strategic effects, on the one end, it can be very technology dependent, right? Because it depends upon what you can actually execute at the tactical level. Mm-hmm. At the other end, the more you tie into strategy, the what I'm trying to accomplish at the strategic level is a little bit different. Yeah. It used to be the case that whenever you talked about the operational level of war, people thought of it primarily as being about logistics. It is not unfair to say that logistics are a big part of it.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
But there's also other pieces of it also, like, and a lot of that has to do with getting operational level effects from things outside the specific campaign that you're trying to do. Like, for instance, in World War II, we're getting ready to attack the Philippines, etc. And Halsey goes off and does a carrier raid on Formosa, what we would call Taiwan. So not directly part of that campaign on the Philippines, but the idea is that he's trying to gain strategic or operational level effects over on the Japanese on Formosa to prevent those forces from interfering with in the Philippines. And so that type of operational fire on something that's outside that the strict location of the campaign, that's, and there's strategic level equivalents of that. There's tactical level equivalents of that. Mm-hmm.
To answer a question real quick,
yeah,
Eric, it depends on what kind of con you're going to. First off,
yes,
yes. But the things I suggest people do is, if you are going to a con, wear comfy shoes. Or if you're not wearing comfy shoes because you're in cosplay, have comfy shoes with you. Make sure you have like a water bottle that you can refill at any point, because the convention centers always overprice the water. The convention center food is way overpriced as well. So, keep that in mind when you're packing for snacks and things like that. And keep a sweater on hand for if a convention room is too cold, but fully expect that when you've got a critical mass of people, it will get hot.
Yeah.
And make sure you have like an umbrella or poncho or something like that, because a lot of conventions are between multiple buildings.
So I'll take a step back to answer that question. One step back from that. There are there are cons that are anything from a couple of hundred people or smaller up through 70,000.
Yeah.
Right. So if you go to something like Dragon Con or Comic Con, they're huge.
Gen Con's big
And
too.
they're spread all over the place. If you go to something like your local science fiction convention, they're a lot smaller. And I'm going to talk primarily about science fiction conventions. Game conventions are, I'll talk about game conventions a little bit after I talk about science fiction conventions. So frequently they are, sometimes they're very generic. Sometimes they are very specific, at least in terms of like they're a particular type of con. So like you might have an anime con, which will focus on, wait for it, anime type stuff. That doesn't mean it's exclusively anime, but it does mean that if you're an anime fan and you get to choose between a literary con and an anime con, and you want to see anime stuff, you don't have to be Nostradamus to figure out you're probably going to do better at the anime con for that particular topic. Many cons are volunteer run and they're not for profits. Some are for profits. So like big media cons, like if it's billed as a Star Trek convention, that almost certainly means it's a for-profit con. And that almost certainly means that you'll have media stars there, but Brent Spiner doesn't go to a con just because he wants to go to a con. Brent Spiner goes to a con because somebody is going to pull out a checkbook and write him a big ass check to go to that con. And so, you go to a con and William Shatner's there and you want to get a picture with him, bring your wallet. You're going to need it. You want to get a signature, bring your wallet. You're going to need it. Now, you go to like a regular science fiction convention, you want to get David Weber's signature in a book, you can leave your wallet in your room. Well, you might need to buy a book for him to sign.
Yeah, it kind of depends on the table. A lot of the time, they'll just ask that you buy a picture or a book or whatever it is that they happen to have on the table, and they'll sign it for free. But it depends on like who they are, how big they are. Yeah. A lot of different factors go in. But end of the story is basically like when you're going to a con, make sure that you keep in mind that you're going to spend money. No matter what, whether that's on product or signatures or photos or whatever, you're going to spend a couple $100 usually.
Yeah,
at least.
So a lot of it also depends upon geographically where they're located. So let me do a concrete example. A couple of weeks ago, I went to Cleveland Concoction, which is a con in the Cleveland area that I'm told was a lot smaller this year. My very first time going, a lot smaller this year than it traditionally is. They had an art room. They had a vendor area. They didn't have any booksellers there, but you could go and you could buy all sorts of things like, you could buy necklaces and you could buy,
there's usually some sort of artist alley.
Yeah, there's usually, you can buy artwork. There's usually somebody who's selling knives or swords or something like that.
Leather work.
Selling games, stuff like that. There was a con suite. So the con suite is a place that has snacks. The farther north you go, the more likely it is it's going to be like chips and cookies and snacks like that. The farther south you go, the more likely it is that there's going to be like a crock pot and they're actually going to serve you chili or something like that. For some cons, you can basically live off the con suite. You can basically, you paid your $50 or $60 or whatever it is. And if you want, you could eat most of your meals there. Not always the healthiest of food, but you could do that.
Yeah.
I've been at cons where they made pizza.
Yeah, definitely just pay attention to which con you're going to.
Yeah.
Look at the logistics, look at like how big it is, what's going on there. Like Gen Con, for example, in order to get into a lot of the like seminars, things like that, you do need tickets. But pay attention to which one it is, because like the Vampire the Masquerade LARP thing that they did this year, Like that was free a good portion of the time. Some things are free, some things are not. Usually, if it's a larger one, they will have a dedicated app. Get
Yeah.
the app; it will help you.
Yeah, and so there was something else I was going to say about that. For things like Comic-Con, right? I don't know whether it's technically a for-profit or not. My guess is it's probably.
I think it is.
It didn't used to be, and it used to be really about comics. Now it's about all media stuff. But I mean, with some of those panels, you've got 400 people in a room, and if you want to get on one of those panels, you may have to sit through. If the panel you want to see is at 3 o'clock, you may have to get there at 10 a.m. and sit through
It
all the
is
other
considered
panels.
a nonprofit.
Okay. But it's a big ass nonprofit.
Yeah, it's a big, because they also put on WonderCon.
But I generally, I've got no desire to go to Comic-Con, like zero.
Yeah.
I don't really have a desire to go to Dragon Con, although I might at some point, just because I know so many people who do. Never been to Gen Con, though. Gen Con's a gaming convention. All that stuff about Con Suites.
Gen Con's worth it. Gen Con is so worth it.
All that stuff about Con Suite I was talking about, that's a science fiction convention thing, and it's not a big for-profit con thing. That is a local literary con sort of thing, is when you start talking about Con Suites.
Well, Con Suites also, depending on which con it is, like I think Dragon Con does Con Suites, but it's for like the guests.
Yeah, they'll do, like, you mean like a green room?
Yeah, pretty much. It is pretty much like a green room.
Yeah, so some cons for like if I'm going as a participant, right? If I'm sitting at the front of the room rather than in the audience section, frequently there will be a green room for people that have participant badges. And it's basically just a place where we can go and sort of chill out and talk with our colleagues and things like that. And it's not that people don't want to go out and hang out with everybody else. It's just that sometimes,
sometimes you just need a little bit of time to decompress.
You need a little bit of time to decompress. And it's like, sometimes it's like, my friend Walter Hunt, the only time I ever see him is at a con. Now, Walter's actually a bad example, because if Walter and I are both at a con together, we're probably roommates at that con. But for other things, it's like, it's nice to be able to go and talk with somebody else about, like, the industry, about the business aspects of it or whatever, or just like hey, Gail, haven't seen you in forever, go have a conversation. Cons are very different. Like, there's a great story about Marina Sirtis, who, most of the Star Trek people, when they go to a con, they're going to a for-profit con.
Yeah.
They're going to something where they're getting paid. And sometimes cons will pay for guests to come in. Usually the guest of honor has tickets and et cetera. They're not necessarily getting a paycheck, but they're being provided for.
Yeah.
But, like, I heard a story about Marina Sirtis being at a con, and it was more of a literary con. And she went down to the bar, and nobody paid any attention to her. And after about an hour there, she said to somebody else there, she said, "Okay, did I piss everybody off here? Why is nobody paying attention to me?" And they said, "Well, ma'am, we're giving you some space. We figured that that you came down to have a drink, etc." And she goes, "No, I came down to the bar because that's where everybody is, and I'm here, so I figured I'd come down and talk with people. And nobody's coming up and talking to me." And it's like, oh,
we're trying to be respectful of you.
Respectful. We didn't realize that you were expecting it. And the thing is that her attitude, there's a difference between the creation cons that run Star Trek cons, etc. There is a difference in their attitude, and the attitude of the people who go there, than there is to, like, Boss Cone up in Boston.
Yeah.
Now, Boss Cone in particular, or Aresia, as Olive Drab points out, Aresia, those are cons that try to sort of mix people together a lot. And like, Boss Cone doesn't have a green room, or at least they didn't the last time I was there. They just have the con suite. And so if you're a pro, you go to the con suite like everybody else. And, sometimes you end up with people coming up to you and sitting down and talking with you, and sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
Right. So,
well, like I know, since I do content creation, like a lot of the time, like with tabletop conventions, most tabletop players are trying to be respectful. So, like, even if they're over to the side going, "Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god," they're not going to necessarily come up to you unless, like, you've okayed it beforehand.
yeah. Yeah. Now, the thing is, for science fiction conventions in particular, the reason why authors go to science, so most of the people on the program of like a literary science fiction convention, like a Regia or Boscone or Marcon, which is coming up in late May, or Concoction or something like that, most of the people there are paying for their own hotel. They're not paying the like $50 to be in the con. Usually depends upon the con. There are some cons like Capclave in particular, their space is so expensive that for a long time the con chair paid for a con ticket because they were in a very expensive hotel because it's DC and they're all very expensive. But like when I go to one of these things, I probably get comped my attendance. I may get a +1 badge. So if I've got a friend or somebody with me, then I can get somebody else in free or maybe at a discount. I'm paying for my own hotel. I'm paying for my own food. Now, if you're a guest of honor, you don't pay for any of that, and they'll buy you a plane ticket, etc. Like when David Weber goes to cons, David is a big guy, and he's got some issues with arthritis and stuff like that. So David basically says, "Look, you're gonna buy me a first class ticket. If I'm flying, it's me and my wife Sharon, first class tickets. And if that's too expensive for you, then I'm too expensive for your con." But David also goes to a lot of small cons.
Yeah.
David is a pretty big name, but he goes to a lot of cons that wouldn't ordinarily be able to get somebody who's that big a name. And he's not the only one who does this. A lot of science fiction people will go to smaller cons. They'll reserve some space in their schedule to go to smaller cons just because otherwise, if you can't go to anything other than the local con, you'd like to see somebody like David show up there.
Yeah.
So, for instance.
Yeah, no, like when I've gone to Gen Con both years, my ticket was comped and so was my accommodation. Like I had to, well, first year because of I was actually working, they paid for some of my food, but like, and they were supposed to pay me back for gas, but stuff happened.
And so, like, if I go to a con and Baen is there, Baen Books. So I've published some things on their website. I've written a book that was published by Baen. And by written, I mean, I copy edited and wrote one chapter in the book and, but I was part of it, and so I usually end up getting invited. Let me rephrase that. I end up getting invited. I usually go to the Saturday night dinner that Baen does. And so whoever the senior Baen person is, they'll just say, "Hey, why don't you come in? We're going to go out to dinner." And it's an expense for them. It's a business expense for them. They get everybody together and they all go out to dinner. Worldcon in particular, Worldcon is a weird science fiction convention, but a lot of authors go to Worldcon because that's where all the agents go to. That's where all the publishers and editors go to.
Yep.
And so for them, it's a business meeting. When I go, I treat it like it's a business meeting, even though, when I go to a con, if they're giving me a badge, as far as I'm concerned, I'm working. So one of the things I need to do tomorrow is send a note to the Marcon people saying, "Hey, when I gave you the 6 presentations, I didn't necessarily say I want you to schedule me for 6 presentations."
Yeah.
That I said up to 6. So if you want to schedule me for 6, you go right ahead. But if you don't, if you're having a hard time fitting all my presentations in, feel free to tell to not do it because that's great. But I always go and basically tell them within certain broad constraints, like if I don't want to do something at 11 o'clock at night, I will be a zombie at 11 o'clock on Saturday night. yeah, at a con, I will, because I will have gotten up at dark 30 and I would have been running all day. I spend a lot of time conserving my energy for the show. So that can be a, when I go to a con like that, as far as I'm concerned, I'm working, and I tell them, work me as hard as you want.
Yeah. Like when I get invited to a con like that, like I'm there working. Yeah, I'm also having a little bit of fun, but like I'm there to do the networking and do the things.
Yeah, Bob points out if you can logistically bring your own food, then do it. It'll be much faster and less expensive.
Yes, but keep in mind, like, sometimes it's just easier to not have to carry that with you, because you have to think about, like, how far you're walking, whether you're able to actually properly store it, and a lot of different factors. Like, am I going to accidentally, like, squish this thing?
Well, so my secret to that is if I go to a con and I want to make sure that I pack in food, I bring Hormel complete meals.
Yeah.
Which are shelf stable. They don't need to be refrigerated. They are pretty indestructible, and while they are designed to be microwaved, that is only to heat them. It is not to cook them.
Yes.
So you can if you can stand it, and I will admit my standards in food are famously low. I went to a con in Cedar Rapids, and they did not have a microwave in the room. I was a little surprised about that, because these days most people have microwaves in the room, and I ended up eating those meals not using a microwave. But it works. It's fine.
So is Dragon Con, just by the way. Dragon Con is the only con I've been to that parking lot karaoke, complete with beer. And as long as you're like within a certain vicinity of the con hotels, APD doesn't give a shit. They're like, whatever. Have fun.
Boss Cone in Aresia, there's a guy up there named Bill Ricker who runs his own little, he'll do a party called MaltCon, and he brings a giant footlocker full of different scotches and whiskey. And they just do impromptu little tasting things. So
fair enough. Yes, always request a fridge in your room if they have it available. Also, keep in mind that Airbnbs can be an option as well. After MREs, Hormel is a baguette.
Yep.
Or banquet.
Yep.
Banquet.
Yes. Either one works. So that's it about that's what I have to say about science fiction conventions. I mean, the thing about gaming conventions are, they have a different character. If I had to choose, if somebody put a gun to my head and said you have to choose between gaming conventions and science fiction conventions, that's a no-brainer for me. I'd go to science fiction conventions.
And personally, I mean, obviously, I'm choosing the gaming convention.
Yeah, and I totally understand it. It's just,
I mean, that's my day job, so
yeah.
I literally get paid to run D&D now.
Which a good job if you can get it.
Yeah.
Good job.
I wish I got paid a little bit more, but it's getting off the ground. So maybe later on. Which, by the way, guys, if you want to like play D&D, Project Aurora, like do the things, do the excite. Join me.
So I'm looking at it. We're 49 minutes in. I don't think there's any point in me actually starting the Trent Hone section that I was going to do today. So let's just
I think this just turned into us talking about conventions.
Yeah. Well, let's just continue doing questions. Stephen Ross says, in Pittsburgh, we had a retired naval officer make the booze for our room party.
Yeah, that happens a lot. I know for Dragon Con, a lot of people make mead and bring it.
Yeah.
A lot of people make mead. In fact, one of the breweries here in Atlanta, meaderies, started because they were going to Dragon Con and other conventions, and they were making mead themselves, and they happen to actually be my favorite mead company. They're
that works. Oh, one of the other things about science fiction conventions, like you can't do this at some place like an honor, Comic-Con, right? Or, your ability to just walk up to Brent Spiner at a Star Trek convention is fairly limited.
Yeah.
My understanding, those guys usually don't even stay at the same hotel.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if you go to something like Boscone or Arisia or something like that,
There we go.
You can walk right up to the author and talk to them. I had a colleague. I had a colleague named Glenn. Glenn was, presumably still is. Glenn used to be an Army helicopter pilot turned intelligence officer.
Mhm.
Glenn was a self-conscious caricature of a human being at times. He'd walk into the boss's office and say, "Sir, am I going to be allowed to shoot somebody today?" It's like, "Glenn, you work in an office." No.
But I wanna.
So Glenn,
Viking's Blood is actually not my favorite, but I'm also not a fan of hops, and they use hops in their mead mix.
I'm not a fan of hops either. So,
well, then you would like the mead I just showed off, because they don't use hops; it's just pure honey mead. Well, depending on the flavor. Like this one's pear and almond flavored. It's Viking Alchemist. So if you're down here, or if you have it near you,
yeah,
I think you can order it from their website too. Even out of state. I think it just depends on like what your state laws are with it.
So Glenn had decided that he was going to go to. He went off and did this. He had a bunch of leave. He had a bunch of use or lose leave. And so he went off and did this meditation thing, which he said was really funny because he's a major in the U.S. Army at the time.
Mm-hmm.
He was not the sort of person that everybody else at this meditation clinic was. And then at one point I had given to him, I had recommended to him Marco Cluse's science fiction series that starts with Lines of Departure, and I forget the rest of the books in the series. It's fantastic. The series is fantastic.
Yeah.
So I had recommended this to him, and he loved it. And I said to Glenn, "Hey, there's this con called Honor Con. It's a David Weber con down in North Carolina. It's about 300 people.
Yeah.
And Marco Cluse is going to be one of the guests of honor. And if you go down there, you could probably talk to Marco for like an hour if you wanted to." So I then go away on a work trip. And when I come back, it had turned from me recommending to Glenn that he go to HonorCon, that Glenn go so that he could talk to Marco Cluse, to a whole bunch of people in the office going, "Woohoo, we're going to Comic-Con." It's like, whoa. Time out.
What?
Comic-Con, 70,000 people.
Yeah, very big difference.
HonorCon, 300 people.
Yeah.
Adjust your expectations accordingly.
Yep. Pretty much.
Glenn went down there with a couple of my colleagues. They only stayed overnight one night because they had to get back.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of fun. We, my friend Brian Haven will frequently go to cons and help run the Horizon bridge simulator, not Artemis. Artemis was the first one. Horizon is a different one that's actually more customizable, etc. But it's a bridge simulator. And so it was Glenn, who's a former helicopter pilot, my friend Stork, who's a former P3 pilot. I'm trying to remember the other guy's name. Doesn't matter. The other guy's a surface warfare officer, and me playing Artemis. So I just basically parked in the communications section because the rest of them were having the two pilots were fighting over who's going to get to be the pilot. The surface warfare officer decided he was going to be combat, and so whoever wasn't the pilot that time around would be engineering. And so we played the Horizons bridge simulator for about 45 minutes or so. 45 minutes to an hour. And then I ran them. I went to the local TRMN chapter. So the TRMN guys they do. They've got this thing called a missile pod. It's a layered shot. And it takes a little effort to make. They usually only do them on Saturday night, but this group wasn't going to leave. Was going to leave about 6 o'clock on Saturday. They weren't going to be there on Saturday night. So I went up to the guy who does them and said, "Hey, can you roll pods tonight? Can you do that for my friends?" And they went, "Yeah, well, okay, we'll roll pods." So they went through the whole thing, and there's an elaborate ritual. There's a sort of a question, and it's got 3 liqueurs in it. It's all Honor Harrington based. The cream de cocoa represents the hot chocolate that Honor is so fond of. The cinnamon schnapps represents this. The rum chata represents that, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Yeah, as Bob points out, it's quite a ceremony when you go through and do it all. And the way that you drink it when you go do it is you do a salvo launch where the guy leading it says fire, and you all go fire, 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 and throw it back. And the goal, and he's got a stopwatch and he's timing you. So the goal is to try to do it as fast as you can without doing it all at the same time. And so afterwards, the Lance was the other guy's name. Lance comes up and says that was a very fine naval ceremony. That was a very fine naval ceremony, and he enjoyed it. And that was just in the con suite. So it wasn't anything special. It wasn't a special invite thing. It was just in the con suite. So, as Bob pointed out about Asimov, best conversationalists, and even at Worldcon, he interacted with as many fans without making people pay for the pleasure. That's really how it works at most science fiction conventions. You can just walk up and talk to people. So my friend Walter Hunt, who I now room with at cons, so I always make the comment, Walter met me at PhilCon in 2005. I met Walter, maybe it was 2006 PhilCon. I met Walter about 3 years earlier at a con in Baltimore. Walter doesn't remember me from that con, nor should he, because I was just some guy that walked up and talked to him while he was sitting at the book signing table in the dealer's room. And, there was nobody around, and I just walked up and said, "Tell me about your book. I haven't read it yet. Tell me about it. Tell me." Okay. That sounds interesting. Okay. Thank you very much for your time. Took a business card, went and bought the book.
Fair enough.
Walter has no memory of this. Like I said, nor should he. Now, at some point, Walter's going to come on the show, and we're going to talk about that book. It was The Dark Wing, which is the first of it's got 3 sequels. It's a very nice space opera. I need to reread it. He's trying to go back to that universe. He's got a prequel novel that is currently the number 1 open tab on my iPad. I'm going to start it tomorrow to give him some feedback on that. So the thing about most of those science fiction conventions is you can just walk up, and you can't walk up and talk to Brent Spiner like this, but and usually, like George R.R. Martin, if he's at a con, he's so swamped it's hard to talk to him. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is, for some of these cons, like usually there's an after party on Sunday. The con ends about 3 o'clock on Sunday, and then they sort of do a bunch of cleanup stuff, and then at about 6 or 7 there's an after party. And David Weber in particular, when he's guest of honor, he sticks around for the after party. He never leaves on Sunday. He always leaves on Monday. And he specifically goes to the party because that's where all the people who worked the con go. Now, The rest, everybody else is invited too, but that's the first opportunity. The people who work the con are usually too busy working to actually attend the event that they're doing.
Yeah.
And so that's when they get to sort of sit and talk to people. So David always makes a point of sticking around for that so that he can talk to the con staff. When Bu 9 is there, we always make a point of not going to that party. Mm-hmm. For 2 reasons. Yeah, Bob points out the after party is the dead dog party. Bu 9 always makes a point of not going to that for 2 reasons. One reason is because everybody else is talking to David. and we don't want to get in the way, right? If we're there, it just gets us in the way. And it's also an opportunity for us to see each other. So we generally go off in some other place. We try to kind of do it in a public place, like not like in a hallway or something, not in, we'll find a table or something someplace, so that, because we're perfectly okay with other people coming and joining us as well. But we also try not to crash the dead dog party and get in the way of David interacting with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jens points out that he's old enough that you could just walk up to the Star Trek people back in the 70s and 80s. Yeah, I don't think it works that way. To be honest, it's been so long since I've been to a Star Trek convention, and I didn't stick around to meet anybody anyway. So, but I just
Fair enough.
It works that way. Wright says at Wonderfest he drank bourbon with Kurt Thatcher and Rick Sternbach. I don't know Kurt Thatcher. I do know Rick a little tangentially. Rick's a good guy. Like Rick a lot. Would love to have him on the show. Not sure if the show is not sure if he's in a position where he could be on the show. So we'll see. All right. Anybody have any other questions? We probably got time for one more question. Kirk was the punk on the bus in Star Trek 4. Okay, roger that. So I can tell a little story about I did the Axanar track at SphinxCon. So SphinxCon was in Atlanta. It was sort of a spinoff from HonorCon. It was a Honor Harrington Con. And Alec did a separate track for Axanar. I had interacted with Alec a little bit before that, but the timing wasn't right for either one of us. So that was when I got reintroduced to Alec, because Alec and I were on a panel with David Weber together. But they had their own green room, and Gary Graham had already left by the time I got in there. But there were some of the other actors were there, and Alec interviewed me. It's on the DVD. He interviewed me for about 10 or 15 minutes. And then I spent about a half hour talking with J.G. Hertzler. And
JG's a fucking character. If you've never talked to him before.
We spent a half hour talking, and neither one of us mentioned Star Trek.
Oh, yeah. No, that's JG for you.
Because I walked up to him and said, "I'm very glad to meet you. I was just talking with you about you last week with Lawrence Shun." Lawrence is an author friend of mine who has written a couple of novels, 2/3 of a trilogy, Barsk and Moons of Barsk, where JG did the voice narration for it, for the audiobook. Now, Lawrence is the founder of the Klingon Language Institute. So Lawrence is plugged into the Star Trek world in that regard. Yeah. And so I had just seen Lawrence a couple of weeks previously at a science fiction convention. And I said, "Oh yeah, JG did, I mean, he's perfect for that." And so that got us launched off into this story where he goes, "Oh yeah, I love those books. They're fantastic. They're hard to do because there's so many different characters and you got to keep them straight and this and that." And, and he talked a little bit about what it's like to be a voice artist for that sort of thing, because you have to keep the, all the characters have to be audio distinct enough that you can make out automatically which character is talking, and you have to keep all that straight in your head. And so we talked about that for a while, and we talked about his pre-acting career, where he worked for the General Services Administration, and I talked with him about the idea a friend of mine had about having the GSA is a cover for a spy organization and stuff like that. So it was a lot of fun. So Stephen Ross says, we once lured Philip Glass to our room party with Montreal bagels and lox. Philip Glass, the composer? Was that a science fiction convention? Or is there another Philip Glass that I'm not aware of? So we'll see if that comes up. Dabbling Warlock said, I did about expanding that Navy, that building a Navy slide to build a full military. Could you do that, and how would you do it? So I can't remember. Have I done the building a Navy talk in Starfleet Tactical? I think I did. I think
you have, but it's been a hot minute.
Yeah, it was in the first 6 months or so. Yeah, the building a Navy thing is most of what is in the building a Navy slide, you could just sort of cross out Navy and write in military, because it's the exact same sorts of issues. So for those who haven't seen that presentation, it's something that started off when I was at the Naval War College. Somebody used this slide in a brief, and I said, hey, can I get a copy of that slide? And I didn't mention starships even once, and got a copy of the slide and sort of ended up writing with David Weber an essay about building a Navy in the Honorverse. And we sometimes do this as a presentation at cons, where it's got, on the far left-hand side, it starts off with like grand strategy type stuff. Now on the right-hand side, it's down to the very nuts and bolts about, how you do basing and what your personnel management policies are, et cetera. And it's about 20, 25 boxes that cover the various types of decisions that have to be made in order to have a working Navy. And they include things like, what's your concept of operations? Like, are you a garrison force? Are you patrolling? Are you prepared to go to war tomorrow? Or are you a cadre that you're going to build up? What's your personnel policies? Do you assume, like the Marines famously, the Marines model is that most Marines are only around for one tour. The Army model is they try to keep you in as long as they can. And so both of those models, both of those services have optimized their personnel policies for that particular model. They don't work. If they were to like swap, they wouldn't work with the personnel policies that they have. Mm-hmm. So it covers all those things. And when it's usually David and Tom Pope and I do it when we do it live, I go through and explain what each one of the boxes means. And then David talks about, in the Honorverse, blah, 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 blah. And so there's a version of it in House of Steel, the Honorverse Companion, that is specifically building a novel in the Honorverse. Dabbling Warlock says, did at least 2 parts starting with episode 63. I think that sounds right. I could check my spreadsheet, but
just so this doesn't get lost again, because I saw it once already. Chris, have you seen Honor Among Thieves yet?
Not.
Okay, so best to go without spoilers then. Clearly, I have seen it, and I did get a hold of the popcorn bucket, which a lot of people were unable to. I had a blast. I had a straight up blast. It is a decent movie, and it does a good job of showing how D&D spells and features and abilities would work in a real life kind of setting. Well, obviously like a fantasy setting, but a real life fantasy setting. Because like you see Chris Pine's Harper, he is a bard, but the Harpers are a secret society in that world of Faerun. He clearly gives Holga bardic inspiration on multiple occasions. He does calm emotions a few times. We definitely saw Mage Hand quite a few times. Fireball. What's another spell? Prestidigitation is shown off with the fresh cut grass scene. There's there's a lot of good like Easter eggs and things like that. It also, if you haven't seen it already, you will have seen this in the previews. They do have a Easter egg that is the 1980s animated series Party.
So that sounds interesting. I haven't seen this D&D movie.
Have you seen the 2000s one?
I saw the other two D&D movies.
Oh, the ones that were on Sci-Fi?
No, the gamers.
Oh yeah.
And the sequel, which
Fair enough.
I'm one of the few people that I think like the original better than the sequel, but so.
But yes, I very much enjoyed it. I definitely had several moments where I had an outburst. Like near the end, I'm like, all right, is that tidal wave or are we going to have wall of water? For example, I'm like, come on, which one? It was tidal wave. It was tidal wave.
See,
that is my all-time favorite D&D spell, and no one will tell me otherwise because I have straight up made a DM have to counterspell it because he hates it that much. I'm like, no, like it was worth.
So one of the great hallmarks of being successful in a game is if in the end they have to change the rules to stop what you did.
He wasted his highest level spell slot in order to counterspell it. So he was like, I wanted to do this, and I'm like, hey, I'm playing a paladin. What about this?
I once in a class at the War College, I and one of my colleagues so badly broke the game they had to change the rules of the game that we found an exploit and drove a truck through it.
Look. If you're not occasionally power gaming,
yeah,
you're not doing it right.
Well, I will admit a little bit of what sort of annoyed me about this entire incident was I was in the wargaming department. Mm-hmm. And this was the academic side, and it's like they could have come over to our department and said, hey, can you help us with this game? And they didn't. They designed it by themselves, and so I found an exploit and I drove a truck through it.
Not your fault.
I'm a Navy SEAL. Drove a truck through it. So
not your fault.
So my brother John says that next time he's on the show, we need to talk about this movie. I'm not sure when because the next time I'm going to be in Des Moines, I won't be doing a show because that'll be the weekend of DemiCon. So I'll be at a science fiction convention. So there'll probably be the time after that. So it probably won't be until like June.
Fair enough. Which is fine because I don't know when I'm going to have to move, but whenever that is, we'll figure it out. I'll let you know what's going on, when that happens and everything.
Sounds
but it's good. Looking like we're not going to be able to keep this house because the math's not mathing. It is what it is. But my partner and I'm going to be moving in with my partner when that is. So
that'll work. So Wright says that I should share the story. I'll share the story and then I think we'll call it quits. So I'll share I'm presuming he's asking about the story about breaking the game in grad school. So when I was at the when I was at the Naval War College, I was doing the faculty by day, student by night thing. And so I got a master's degree in strategy from the Naval War College, while at the same time I was a professor of wargaming across the way. And so we're playing this game on Vieques. The Navy had this island that they used as a gunnery range, and they were having to get rid of it. And the way it worked out is every different group had their own little payoff matrix, and they're trying to get. We're going to put a 6-part plan in place. And included like this action and this action, and then funding at the end. So it was like 6 planks to this plan. And everybody got a payoff for certain planks. If you get your plank into the plan, you get so many points.
Yeah.
And Bill, my Navy SEAL colleague, and I, we were both we were the tree huggers. We wanted it turned into a nature preserve. And the way it works out is that there's no way the tree huggers can win. They just can't. The incentive structures don't work out. It's in nobody's best interest to cooperate with the tree huggers. So And part of it is that one of the mechanisms they had was the Navy can veto any plan, and this big telecommunications company that's there can veto any plan that they're part of. And the problem that they have, and they use that telecommunications plan. The Navy just cared about the money. The telecommunications plant company, they were able, they had certain criteria that were at odds with everybody else's. And so their incentive structure was just to veto everything unless they got exactly what they wanted.
Yeah.
And so Bill and I very quickly figured out that there was like no way we could win. And so Bill and I just decided it was a good opportunity for us to sit in the corner and have a conversation. And so we did that for about 20 minutes. And then I'm looking at the board and I went, hey, Bill, what if we did X? And he goes, well, that's not going to work because they'll veto it. And I said, what if we don't include them in the plan? The way it's set up is rather than have like it set up so that for each group, there's another group that's going to have the ability to stop it. It was, they put the veto for the telecommunications company was doing the heavy lifting for everybody. Mm-hmm. And I said, if we give the Navy a lot of money and we exclude the telecommunications company, they can't stop us.
That's true.
And so I started going around the room and I said, what about if we do X? And they'd say, well, the telecommunications company will veto it. And I said, look at the board. They only veto, the Navy has a veto regardless because they own the property. Telecommunications company only has a veto if they're part of the plan. Mm-hmm. So fast forward about 5 minutes, I'm at the front of the room. Okay, what do you guys need to sign up for this? We need XYZ. Okay, all right, that sounds good. XYZ. You guys, what do you guys? Are you guys good? Anybody got a problem with XYZ? All right, how about you guys? What do you guys need for this? Blah, 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 blah. And so we went around the room and I orchestrated the deal. And the thing is that with the way it worked out with the tree huggers is the stuff we wanted was pretty innocuous. Mm-hmm. And it didn't conflict with anybody else. It basically worked out that once you took the telecommunications company out of it, these guys cared about plank 1. These guys cared about plank 2. These guys cared about plank 3. These guys cared about plank 4. Mm-hmm. They didn't have the balance of this game correct. And so once I figured out what the exploit was, we drove a truck through it. And then it got time for the planning or for the payment, right? Who's going to pay for it?
Yeah.
And one of the options was to have the telecommunications company pay for everything. And at first I said, all right, that doesn't make sense because they're not part of the plan. And then I thought to myself, this game is broken because my colleagues across the street didn't go to the wargaming department because, this wasn't a brilliant exploit. You only think about it for about, I thought about it for about 20 minutes and went, duh. Right? This was the sort of any gamer could figure out in just a little bit of time. I might have thought of it a little bit faster, but this is something that anybody listening to this would have figured out.
Yeah.
And so I thought, it would be ridiculous if we made the telecommunications pay for a plan that they weren't part of. But you know what? The rules let us do it. And I want to drive a truck through the hole in the rules to make a point. And so that's what we did. Now, in that class,
you gotta do what you gotta do.
Yeah. That class had 3 different instructors, and like each one would teach for like a module. So like we'd have one instructor for 5 weeks, and then we'd have another instructor for 5 weeks, etc. So this was the end of that. And so like 2 weeks later, when we've got a new instructor, when we come back from we take a break halfway through because it's like a 3-hour long class. Halfway through, we we're taking the break, and I'm sort of waiting for class to start. And he goes, "Hey, how'd your Vieques game go?" And I said, "Oh, we won. Bill and I won." It's like, "Well, what role were you guys?" It's like, "Well, we were the tree huggers." At which point he went, "Oh, you were the guys."
That's always a great feeling. It's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah,
He said,
you're the ones I heard the stories about.
"You were the guys that did that." And then he started to say something, which I won't go into, but he started to say something that I watched as halfway through what he was saying, he realized, oh yeah, I'm talking to a student. I can't say that to a student. It was a little bit of like how they made the decision about who to put on which team. Let's just say it wasn't random. And he realized that he was about to sort of like show the magic taking place behind the curtain. And technically, you probably shouldn't do that because I was wearing my student hat, not my faculty hat.
Fair enough.
So Alam asks, so in the rules, the telecom company paying for everything didn't constitute involvement, thus a veto? Nope, it did not.
Look. Loopholes. You guys played the rules lawyers and you won because of it.
And Jen said, as we used to say in the service, and if I remember correctly, he was Navy, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. Yeah, that's definitely...
But see, here's the thing. Rules as written, so raw, you guys were in the right.
Yeah.
And because they were saying, go by the rules, they couldn't say anything.
But Jens is totally right about this. If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. When I was an analyst on board for RIMPAC 2002, and I was on board USS O'Kane, and they were trying to cheat the entire exercise. They were logging onto the red chat, trying to log onto the red chat rooms, and they kept getting caught. And it was actually a very interesting situation for me as a CNA analyst, because on the one hand, okay, they're trying to cheat. On the other hand, if I rat them out, it won't stop them from trying to cheat. It just means that the analyst won't know about it. And if I don't know about it, I can't assess whether it had an impact or not.
Yeah.
And so what I ended up doing, my boss was on one of the cruisers. So I sent an email to my boss saying, hey, just to let you know, this is what I know that these guys have tried. This is what I know that they've tried. And I gave them a complete list of everything. So it's like, so far they have been unsuccessful. They keep getting caught. If we ever get to the point where they don't get caught trying to sneak in someplace where they're not supposed to be, I'll let you know. And he said, yep, that's the way to handle this. So. Oh, Jen says he was in the Air Force.
Okay.
So I will tell Jens, when I was at DIA, I was a naval analyst. I shared a 4-person cubicle with 2 uniformed Navy officers and a uniformed Air Force officer. And I used to, the 2 Navy guys would always give the Air Force guy a hard time. And the Air Force guy he just thought it was funny. And I would always say, hey, leave Mark alone. The Air Force is an honorable alternative to military service. And Mark would laugh at that too. But I'd also make a point of about once a week, once every 2 weeks, I'd say, just remember, Mark, if I say something derogatory about the Air Force, I'm probably joking. If I say something derogatory about the Navy, I am not joking.
Right.
And that was definitely the case. So I love the U.S. Navy, but sometimes the U.S. Navy makes it really hard.
I mean, my partner's former Navy. He was a CB, so.
Yes, and when I come down there, I'll have to meet him and we'll talk about that.
I wish you could have had the ability to meet my grandfather before he passed, but.
I did too.
He would have had a blast meeting you.
Yeah. Well, I guess I got to meet his granddaughter, so that's part of
Fair
it.
enough. Oh shit. Sorry. While I'm also doing this, I'm in the process of getting my map for tomorrow set up.
Well, you know what? We should probably call it an evening, and so next time we are going to go back. We are going to talk about Trent Hone, and then we'll talk about Lautenschlager again, and then we'll wrap it all up at some point. I don't know how many episodes it's going to take to do this. Probably at least 2. It may take 3. And then the plan after that is I still want to go through and I was just listening to back episodes to sort of get back up to speed. I always try to listen to the episodes afterwards, and so I was doing that. And back in October, I said something about doing Prefect, Renegade Legion Prefect.
Nice.
Because I want to talk about it because there's an essay in there where they specifically talk about how to think about combat in that universe when you're conducting a raid on facilities in a solar system. And it has a lot to do with how to think about vector movement, etc. So I want to go through, and it's a very interesting case study. It's got some very interesting simple techniques on how to think about that stuff. And some of that stuff is going to tie into when I start talking about fighters, some of that's going to fit into that. And as a little preview of that, because most of the time when you see fighters in science fiction, it's World War II in space or some variation of that, where you've got high performance fighters that are going from something that's relatively low performance. What if you find yourself in a situation where the high performance thing is the carrier? Because that's exactly what you have in C.J. Cherryh's Alliance Union universe. The carrier has way, way more performance than the riders do. The riders are useful because they can spread out the offense, they can spread out the defense, and they're stealthy. And so they can mug people when you're not looking, when they're not looking. They complicate the picture overall. And because they can be out further in front, they can actually have better information because you've got speed of light limits, and that's a universe where things can spread out. Mm-hmm. But fundamentally, the main vector of the fight is probably from the carrier before they deployed from it. Right? If you get this big vector arrow, right, most of your velocity is from the parent ship. Maybe you've got the fuel and the thrust to counteract that, but why would you when you can use your advantage? And so that's one of the things I want to talk about. I want to talk about PT boats in space, as Jens points out. I want to talk about how those assumptions fit into it. And also some things like, under what circumstances do those nifty little launch tubes in Battlestar Galactica make sense? I mean, we don't do that in aircraft carriers. They've got 4 catapults. They don't always use all 4 of them at the same time. From World War II on, we've been willing to launch planes at about the rate overall is about 1 airplane every 15 seconds. Now, they do them much quicker than that, but then there's a longer time period while they're reloading the catapults, and then they do it again. So on average, when you sort of work it all out, it's about a steady rate of about once every 15 seconds. Battlestar Galactica launches an entire air wing in about 5 seconds.
Yeah.
So under what circumstances would you want to have that capability? So that's where I'm planning on going to in this fighter talk. And that fighter talk is probably going to be at least 1 episode, but I suspect it might end up being 2. And then at some point I need to get back to Corbett, and I need to get back to Norman Friedman's Command and Control book. I need to get back to, I can't remember his name, but it's something Italian, where his overview of naval tactical thought. It's like the history of naval tactical thought. I'm going to go through James George's History of Warships and spend some time talking about all the different warship types and how to think of those, why they came up the way they did, historically, how did that happen, and how to think of that in a science fiction setting. And a big theme of this is going to be the importance of your assumptions.
Yeah.
If nothing else, I hope everybody comes away from the show understanding, in general, understanding that it's the assumptions that really define how that problem works. And when, Star Wars makes a particular set of assumptions, some of which are, shall we say, unsupported by the physical realm in which that it takes place. Doesn't mean
look. It's a fantasy too. They've got space magic. So
yeah. And hey, like I said, I'm not suggesting to anybody that you shouldn't like anything you don't already like. I mean, if Alec were here, that would be the time where we go off on our love of Field of Dreams. There's not a damn thing that movie makes the least amount of sense. It is still one of my 10 favorite movies. I will always stop to watch it when I'm flipping through channels and I find it.
I mean, fair enough. Like the OG D&D movie from 2000, horrible movie. Is it still a guilty pleasure of mine? Yes.
I watch Wing Commander once a year.
Fair enough.
I mean, in Wing Commander, we're going to go vertical because we have better climb in our spaceship. But at the strategic level, the basic plot, the individual details of that movie are really dumb.
Mm-hmm.
The basic plot, the structure of the basic plot, once you cut out the fact that all the people in that movie have only known each other for about 36 hours tops, and they're acting like they've been working together for the last 6 months. It's a little over the top in that regard. But the basic structure of the plot, there's nothing wrong with it. I'd really like to see. In fact, it might be at the top of my list. Somebody made the comment once, you shouldn't remake a good movie.
Yes.
You should only make movies that could have been good if they had been done right.
Mm-hmm.
But for whatever reason, they dramatically, got it wrong. And so Wing Commander would be close to the top of my list of movies to make over again. Mm-hmm. So everybody buy lottery tickets, send them to me so that if it wins, I can remake Wing Commander. I promise I'll do that. So I think we're done.
Yes, I believe we are done for the night. Thank you all for coming out and taking time out of your day to just chill with us as we apparently shoot the shit about conventions and things tonight.
Well, if Alec were here, it could have been another 30 minutes or another 90 minutes on Warhammer 40K. So
you're not wrong. I love Alec very dearly, but Warhammer 40K is not like a topic I have any interest in.
I know. So, all right, everybody. Thank you very much. See you next week.
Have a good one, guys. Bye-bye.